I thought I would try doing this question. And this is from OG. Last year, all refuse. Which of the following is required for the new collection program to achieve its aim? So I guess this is an assumption question. For the new program to achieve its aim, what has to be true? Okay, good. So last year, all refuse collected by city services were incinerated. So all the rubbish was burnt, I guess. Okay. This incineration generated huge amounts of ash. That's expected. In order to reduce the amount of ash generated this year to half of last year's, total. So if I was to just think about this point in yellow before reading on, if I was to reduce, so this, how to achieve this? Achieve the yellow. So maybe your reduced total output by half. That could, you could recycle and that you could recycle some stuff. That's, I don't know how much percentage, but they say 20%, and that could bring about a reduction, but not sure if it's a half reduction. That's what's going through my mind as I read the yellow. In order to reduce the amount of ash, the city has revamped its collection program. Okay, what is it doing? This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce. Okay. You will separate for recycling. Okay. So you're going to recycle. That's good. But how much can you recycle? How much do you need to recycle? Because what if recycling is only 1% of the total? What if is recycling? What is out of total trash? Is recycling 50% and non-recyclable 50%, or is recycle 30%? This seems to be almost like a weighted average kind of thing. Non-recycle 70%. So what's the breakup of the recycle versus the non-recycle? We'll separate for recycling. This year's city will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads of refuse to half of last year's number. What does that mean? This year, you essentially people will start recycling. Okay, so that I guess the recycling will not go towards the fire pit. Enough to reduce the number of truckloads. So actually, okay, so the number of trucks will reduce by half to be incinerated. So what does the green indicate that? So that could be one scenario for the green. If I was to just read the green, what scenarios can I think about if I was to just read the green? Scenario 1, total is 50% recyclable and 50% non-recyclable. So now we are removing all recyclable stuff. Hence you are left with only 50% non-recyclable stuff. which hence the number of trucks has reduced by 50%. That could be one thing. Or scenario 2, what are the kind of scenarios? Let's say recyclable was 75% and this is only 25%. And say you are removing, you're not removing, now you are removing not all, so not all recyclable, but only say 80%. So you are left with 20% of 75% of 75%, which is I think I don't know, which is I think 25%. So hence going is 25% of recyclable plus 25% of non-recyclable. Something like that. That's what's going through my mind at least. What has to be true? I think it does. I mean, doesn't this scenario 1 doesn't have to be true because you could create a scenario 2, because I think most people will select this, that 50%, 50%. And if you get rid of your, well, it doesn't have to be true. Something else maybe has to be true. All right, this here, so you're getting rid of recyclable to generate half the number of trucks. So what has to be true? So I guess it has to be true that does your number of, I want to create another scenario actually. Scenario 3, where this is, let's say 20, let's say this is 30% and this is 70%. Now you're removing all recyclable. Hence you are reduce your overall weight has gone down by only 30%. I don't think this is a viable test case, because your weight has gone down by 30% only. So does it have to be that 50% of your trash is recyclable? No, it can be higher. It can be 75% recyclable if maybe if maybe you're still going to include some recyclable stuff into the trash, into the burning pit. Anyways, let's say the goal is to get half the number of trucks to go for incineration. This year, no material the city service could separate. This year, no materials. If I was to just create a scenario 4, what happens if it's a scenario 4 where your total is, let's say, 80% recyclable? recyclable and 20% non-recyclable. Say, oh, we have discussed this. So yeah. So does it have to be that this year will be incinerated this year? No, it doesn't have to be. Because in this scenario, I've just generated this scenario. This is possible, and this is not possible. Does it have to be true that this year no materials that city services could separate? No, I mean, what if there's just one material? Will that really change the number of trucks? No, but could separate will be incinerated. Does this have to be true to reduce reduce it by half? It doesn't have to be true as shown by this scenario because it doesn't have to be true as shown in this scenario because what if it's 75-25 and that way you can separate, you can afford to separate only 80% of your 75% because that still gives you, if you remove only 80% of the 70%, you're still left with 25% of 75%, which is no. If you have 80% recyclable and 20% non-recyclable, you can afford to have a program where you only have to recycle half of the 80%, or no, more than half. But you have to recycle around 62 point. I think it's 62.5%. You have to recycle only 62 of the 80% because you can afford to throw 37.5% of the 80% into the pit because you only need to reduce the total overall by 50% only. I think that's how I would get rid of A. Separating from it to be less. I don't care about cost. I only care about what has to be true to get to half. Refuse collected by city contain a larger portion this year than it did last year. I don't know about C. Refuse will contain a larger. I'll keep C for now. I don't know what it means. The refuse incinerated this year. The refuse. This also is important. The quality. The total quantity of refuse. Yeah, I'm sure all three of them make sense. Refuse collected by city than this year than it did last year. Doesn't matter. Does this have to be true that the city a larger proportion of recyclable than this year than it did last year? I don't think this has to be true to get to 50%. I mean, it helps because it really helps because I can get to my target, but it doesn't have to be true. So D versus E. The total quantity this year will be no greater than, I mean, this again helps, but does this have to be true? Yeah, what if the proportions change? I don't think this has to be true. So I would select D, but let's just go through as to why it makes sense. The refuse incinerator this year will generate no more residential ash. The refuse incinerator this year will generate no more residential ash per truckload. I'm not sure what D means.